That's what
Yeah,
I'll
I
do.
didn't see it in there, and I see it now.
Okay, perfect. All right. I think we're live. Sweet. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different from normal talks, so just be a little bit shorter, I think. Not going to have as many slides. Just have a demo application with the CDK, Postgres, custom VPC, and a Lambda that is all with a Apollo server within that. So go ahead and jump in, do a quick intro. For those of you who are new, my name is Austin Lovelace. I'm a AWS community hero and a full stack engineer at Stuzo. And Kevin Ten is also a host of the meetup group, who just recently got a job as a senior architect at Amazon, and is also a community builder. I don't know if you get to keep your status as both, but he's got all the accolades now.
Yeah, maybe for a little bit. I'll figure that out.
Yeah, just don't tell the community builders that you're doing both.
We'll see how that goes.
Okay, so for the video today, I guess all we'll do is just go through the repo and deploy this, talk about the code, talk about how this is set up. I don't really have much prepared as far as slides, so that'll be easier to just explain as we walk through it. So if anyone wants to follow along, I'd go ahead and clone this, and I have it in the YouTube chat and in the Zoom chat. I'll go ahead and paste it back in the YouTube chat again, just in case. All right. So yeah, go ahead, take a second. Oops, we're in the wrong thing. Take a second and clone that. Give you guys a minute. And yeah, if you have any questions, just go ahead and stop me, and we could go over any questions you may have, or talk about different pieces of the code, expand on things that I may have like brushed over quickly. I tend to talk pretty fast at times. I'll try to slow it down. Just let me know if I'm like rambling on too much and things are getting confusing. So in the README, we just have like a couple instructions you could follow to set this up. I'll go ahead and set it up from scratch, but if you're not going to follow along and you want to reference this later, then this should be pretty comprehensive on what you need to do. If not, then you could just message on GitHub or message on LinkedIn, and I'll put my LinkedIn at the end of this video. Otherwise, let's try and get into this. So everything is built with the CDK, which is the Cloud Developer Kit, all using TypeScript. So we can deploy our resources instead of using things like Terraform or CloudFormation with like the Terraform language or with YAML or JSON. So went ahead and built this application using TypeScript, since our code is also going to be in TypeScript. So we were setting up four different stacks. We have a VPC, an RDS stack, GraphQL, and our CI/CD pipeline. Everything's pretty basic. Just setting up a VPC with a couple security groups that's shared between both our RDS instance and our Lambda. It's pretty wide open. It's nothing like I would use in production, but for demo purposes and for the purposes of deploying this app, everything is connected and working. Oops. So yeah, this is pretty much the gist of our VPC. Setting our CIDR as 10.0.0.0, 16, and then yeah, everything else within that. Have our RDS stack. Again, pretty basic setup here. This is going to be a Postgres instance. We're using Secrets Manager to just secure all of our secrets. One quick note about that. Within the docs, you can create a secret for like a password for your RDS instance within Secrets Manager using the CDK. The docs don't recommend doing that, so I did it through the CLI. Also, another reason I did it through the CLI is because later on in this, we're going to go ahead and set up a CI/CD pipeline with GitHub. And whenever you create a secret with Secrets Manager within the CDK, it will automatically generate it for you, so you can't set a secret value. It'll just build you a random string, which won't work because whenever you're going and setting up your CI/CD pipeline, you need to grab a GitHub token, and that's a specific token that needs to be a part of your application. And so if it's just a generated token, then obviously those won't match up and your pipeline won't work because it won't be able to connect to GitHub and receive all the webhook calls for any changes you make to your repository. So a little note about that. So we're setting up our RDS password, referencing that within our credentials. Just have a DB username, which I'm storing within a .m file, which I have like an env example that you can just copy, and make sure that you update your GitHub owner to whatever your GitHub account name is. And this is if you would clone the repo, or fork the repo, I should say. And all this is outlined within the documentation and the README itself. So yeah, if that doesn't work, then I just went ahead and hard coded it just in case you forget to copy it or whatever. So the username and password will both, or the username and the database name will both be AWS Meetup Group, just to keep it simple. Then we're just going to have a couple of outputs that are going to be the inputs, the username, and the database name. That's the gist of this file. We'll skip to the API stack. So our API stack is just going to be called our GraphQL API stack because it's a GraphQL API all within AWS Lambda and API Gateway. And I'll explain how this works in the code. But high level, we're just going to deploy a function. The code's going to look for our app folder. And then we're going to go in the /build directory src GraphQL handler, which is where our application is going to be initiated from within Lambda whenever we compile all this down from TypeScript into JavaScript. Setting up our security group, adding our VPC so that we can connect to our RDS instance, and then we're just passing a couple environment variables. This is all specific to connecting to our RDS instance. I set up the type RM specifications. We're not going to go over that super deep, but whenever you're using RDS or whenever you're using Postgres, you usually have migrations or seeds that you would want to run to like set up your table structure for your schema. This synchronized true, if you're wondering like how we're going to run migrations within the Lambda and this and that, this isn't something that you may want to do in production. You may want to add this to your CI/CD pipeline to actually run migrations. But essentially, whenever the Lambda is invoked the first time, and I'll show this on the demo, the actual migrations won't have been run yet, and so our Lambda will fail the initial time, but the second time it'll have created the table and the structure, and then we'll be able to start querying our database. So this is kind of what this does. And then we set up a API gateway construct. So we have our Lambda REST API, going to call it the GraphQL API, and it's going to reference our handler up above, referencing our Lambda function. And yeah, we're just going to add the resource. This is going to be making it so we can go to /GraphQL and then be any method, so we can make a GET request and go and see our application and play around with it on the GraphQL playground, which is how we'll test it. And before we go back to the CI/CD pipeline, I just want to say like how this application is structured right now with the hierarchy is we have the CDK as a folder separate, but we have basically the CDK is set up where the CDK JSON is looking at our CDK/bin/appts, which is going to be the root of all of our different stacks. And so this is going to be where you define like the top level stack. And I just set this up because I thought it logically makes sense to pass have a parent and then pass your values down from the parent into the child component. So like with your VPC being like your data center, you would want to have that VPC configuration passed to your RDS instance, so without hard coding it, so that your RDS instance can be deployed within the correct VPC, and of course like security groups. And then the same situation with RDS and our GraphQL. So like our database username and password and port and everything like that, we're passing that down from the RDS stack into the GraphQL stack. And the CDK knows how this is set up, so whenever we deploy this, it won't deploy my GraphQL stack before my VPC stack. It'll deploy the VPC stack prior to the GraphQL stack because it's technically a child of it, even though they are independent. I'm sure there's like many different ways to set this up, but this is the way that I went with it. So then we have our pipeline stack, which is going to be our CI/CD pipeline with code pipeline and code build. And again, here's the configuration for your GitHub credentials. I just put in my values. You can change these if you'd like. Also use the .m file, and that will update this for you. So we're gonna get our secret from secrets manager for a GitHub token. Again, this is documented in the README of how to create that with a CLI command. Creating our secret GitHub token, going to be the name, which we'll reference within this code here, right here, so we can get the value of that token. Then we're going to define our code build project and define our build spec, which is going to be the commands that it runs to build the application and deploy it. And so what we're going to do is install our dependencies. We're going to build the app application, which is the script for that is defined within the package JSON. And then our npx CDK deploy, so we can deploy all of the different stacks with inside our CI/CD pipeline. And then the last couple of things within this is just setting up our actual pipeline itself with the different stages to where we're going to get our code from, being from GitHub as our source control, and then our build action as the second stage to actually build and deploy the application. That was like a really quick rundown of the CDK and the configuration of this. Any questions or like comments on anything about that?
Yeah, Austin, this is Yaran.
Yep.
I'm new to the CDK, but looks like this sample is built with TypeScript. What are the other languages that we can do with CDK?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of all the languages, but I'm pretty sure Java supported, Python supported. Let me see. There's several different languages that are supported. Yeah, C#, Java, Python, TypeScript. So you have a few different options if your application wasn't written in TypeScript.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, we've done through CloudFormation before.
Yeah, I've done a lot of CloudFormation and Terraform. I just wanted to, this is honestly my first time writing anything with the CDK, and so far is a pretty good experience with like being able to separate everything as far as different stacks go in this easy way, and then kind of tracking where your data flows instead of having like multiple templates nested within each other with these extremely long files that are all gross YAML or JSON or Terraform. Honestly, this made it a lot easier to do, and the docs are like pretty decent. It's still a pretty new application or tool, I guess you would call it. So I'm sure there's some bugs and stuff that are being worked out, but overall it's pretty nice, especially for a small app like this.
Right. But I mean, is the CDK is relatively new, or?
Yeah, I think it came out in 2020.
How do you compare the CDK with Terraform? And
yeah, so like, I guess if you want to talk about maybe some pros and cons, like if I were to, there's some different constructs. Initially, whenever I wrote the CI/CD pipeline, or actually Kevin wrote the CI/CD pipeline initially, and he used a construct is what these different objects are called, and it's called the CDK pipeline. And essentially, instead of defining a code build project and a code pipeline, you would just define a CDK pipeline, and it would build everything for you. And so it would be a lot of almost magic and a lot of things done for you that isn't that you're not managing yourself. And I think that, in my opinion, that can be not super great, because I would like to know exactly what my configurations are whenever I'm looking at the code I use to configure my environment, instead of, which you could still do because it spits out these JSON templates. But I don't know, reading this is just terrible. So I try to like define everything as explicit as possible with the CDK. But yeah, I don't know, comparing it to Terraform, it's a totally different thing.
No, this is cool. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like it a lot. I think Matthew Boneg's on the call, and he's got a lot more information about the CDK than I do. I think they're even writing a book. Yeah, if you want to plug that, Matt, feel free. But yeah, because you've got a ton more information on this than I do. This is my first time dabbling with it.
Sure. So to answer the earlier question about the difference between Terraform and CDK, they're both infrastructure as code. Whereas Terraform is the actual service that will apply those changes against the environment. The CDK is really just a code generator for CloudFormation. And as Austin mentioned, the central concept to that is the idea of construct. And a construct is a abstraction layer. It simply encapsulates a certain amount of functionality. In the case of something like an S3 bucket, the bucket construct is very simple. It just represents one single S3 bucket. But when you look at something like this, the pipeline, the CDK pipeline object, that construct encompasses a lot of things, multiple buckets, a code pipeline, code build projects, lots of things. But you as a consumer of that construct don't really have to care about that because that's what the abstraction layer does for you. You can create these things yourself if you want to, or you can go use third-party constructs that people have published online, or you just use the ones that are built out of the AWS libraries themselves if you want to. But you wire these things together, connecting them all back and forth between properties, and at the end of it, you have whatever system that you're trying to build as it's represented by all the various CloudFormation that it kicks out. In the case of like what he's working on here, we're talking about maybe 200-300 lines of code within this particular stack, but that may result in about 2,000 lines of CloudFormation code. So big
I saw that
advantages.
in the JSON files. Yeah, this is pretty neat.
Yeah, really, really good
Yeah,
in
they're
terms
massive.
of encapsulating that functionality in the same way that if you've worked with React or Vue or Angular, very similar concept in those UI frameworks where you build a component that represents an arbitrary amount of UI. It could be just a single button or it could be an entire form. You don't really have to care as a user of that component. You just leverage that component, provided a couple of values, and you're done. So really good way of being able to take these very complex systems that get built within AWS and boil them down into something that's very easy to consume and very easy to leverage.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for jumping in, Matt. Yeah, so far I've enjoyed it a lot. I know you're a big fan of it, and I was late to join the party, but yeah, it's nice.
And because he gave me the opportunity, if you go to thecdkbook.com, we've got a basic landing page. We're shooting, it's me and 3 other guys within the AWS community, all heroes, that are writing the book. We hope to have it out by the beginning of December, right around reInvent. And if you have any interest in the CDK, we hopefully will be covering everything from start to finish in there for you to get up and running and become a pro with the CDK.
Right on.
Cool.
All right, let's get into how this magic works with our Lambda.
Hey, Austin, real quick. This is Lucas. You mentioned earlier something about secrets and there being some difficulty in managing secrets created within the CDK and GitHub. Can you go through that one more time? I'm not really sure I fully understand where the breakdown is. Can you go through that?
Yep. I'll pull up a doc really quick to kind of explain it while I go through. So basically, whenever you're using Secrets Manager, which is something that I would recommend either this or Systems Manager Parameter Store to secure like private or like secure strings like my GitHub token or my RDS password, like things that I don't want to be exposed. So whenever you're using it whenever you're creating a secret with the CDK or with CloudFormation or anything, you can't specify what the actual secret string value is going to be. So this says it right here, like it doesn't allow you specifying the actual value of the string. So if I were to like create a new secret like this is going to generate me a string itself. And so I won't actually have access to that. So the reason I didn't use this construct is because I already had to create, because that limitation, I had to create a secret for my GitHub token, which is a specific value that GitHub provides for me. And so I went ahead and just repeated that same pattern for my GitHub token and my RDS password. And so that's why with the Secrets Manager values, I went ahead and did it with the CLI. And then Yeah, so that's kind of like the idea behind that. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I understand. So we've used Pulumi in the past, which is very similar to the CDK, cloud agnostic. But it allows you to specify secrets and then encrypts them directly with KMS or something. I didn't know if this had a similar functionality at this point in time.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I think from their documentation too, they also talk about like we recommend that you just create it through the CLI or manually.
Yeah, just to add to that, because all the CDK is going to do is turn your code into CloudFormation templates, if you put an actual secret value within your CDK code, it would then also end up within your CloudFormation template. And if it ended up in your CloudFormation template, then it would likely be exposed to anybody looking at that template. And that is a very bad thing in general. So you can either create the secret manually and then what's called an import, where, as you see here with the code that he's showing, you create the secret outside of the CDK, and then you create a reference to that secret from within your code so that you can still leverage it. You're just not managing it directly. There are some disadvantages to that approach, and there are some advantages to it. The other thing that you can do is, like in the case of this GitHub token that he was talking about, if you let the CDK code create that secret with a completely randomized value, then the first time the pipeline runs, it will error out because that value is not valid. But then you go back into that secret manually, either through a CLI command or through the UI, you update the value to the proper value, to something that's legitimate, and then you just kick off the pipeline again, and everything just works from there on out.
Yep. Yeah, so either way, you have some kind of manual intervention that would be involved with that.
Yeah, the general approach is that if your AWS CDK code is creating the secret, it's not actually responsible for the value of that secret. It's only responsible for the place that holds that secret. So it gets created, and then you would need to go back and manually update it. If you had secrets that you were using for third-party systems, API keys, anything like that, it would follow the same pattern. You could let the CDK code and CloudFormation create that secret, but then you would have to go back manually and update the actual value in that secret to be correct.
And if you were to do that, if you remove that secret from the CDK, would it also remove it from the secrets manager, even though you've updated and manually intervened in that process?
Technically, it depends upon what you have as the deletion policy on that resource. By default, yes, it would get rid of that secret. But you could change that construct. It's a parameter on it where you could say, if I delete this out of my code, if I delete it from the CloudFormation stack, actually retain the resource within AWS. And that's available on all resources within CloudFormation that you can do that with.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Before we go into the code itself, anybody have any more questions we could cover about CDK and the architecture itself?
I just have a quick question about the CI/CD pipeline.
Yep.
So in your example, what is actually triggering the build here? Can you explain this a little more?
Oh yeah, let me show that. So what's going to happen is every time I do a push to my master branch, in which I define here like my username, my repo, and then the branch I have defined just a variable up at the top, which is set to my master branch. So it's just a pretty simple pipeline for this.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay. All right, let's go into the application itself. So whenever you're writing lambdas, traditionally you have like your handler that's defined, which we still have that defined, our handler function, and AWS wants your Lambda to have a specific response whenever it connects to API gateway, and have like specific headers so that it can properly route your response back. Whenever you set this up with like a larger application, whether it be Express or with GraphQL with Apollo, there's like some magic that's involved with the library called Apollo Server Lambda that handles all of those different mutations for you and handles how API Gateway receives data to and from your Lambda so that it can properly handle all your different requests. So this is the glue, the magic that is involved with actually creating a GraphQL API within your Lambda itself, because Lambdas are very particular with how they're structured. So we still have to define our Lambda function, which I could have called this maybe a better file to be Lambda instead of GraphQL, but this is going to be my actual Lambda where my handler is at, and it's going to be duplicate code in my server. And I set this up this way so that whenever I run npm start, which is just cd into the actual project, when I run npm start, this is going to run my server TS, which I have defined here, run server file instead of running my GraphQL file, my Lambda. And so this will just set up the Apollo server listening on port 8080, and then I'll be able to go and query my database locally and actually do local development. Whenever this gets deployed into the Lambda, what I'm going to do instead is in my CDK and my API stack, I define this as looking at my GraphQL file and then calling that handler function. Since we're using TypeScript with GraphQL, you don't have, that's not like required if you're going to use this library, but typically if you're going to use GraphQL, you want to like strongly type everything so you understand the different, like what you're actually working with, all the different data. And so we need to build this application before we deploy it so that it would be compiled down from TypeScript into normal JavaScript so that our Lambda can actually run that code. So that's why we're looking at this build directory within inside of the app. And this, I know that this is like within cdk/lib, like why don't I have it as like .app? The reason for that is this is looking from this top level directory from the CDK JSON, and so whenever this bundles this up, it's going to grab within this project this folder from the root level, so I don't have to do any kind of paths like that. Go ahead and get that all back. So that's how our Lambda is connected to actually run this. So before we go into deploying it, I have it running locally now, so I can just show like the basics of it. It's a pretty simple application with Postgres stood up, which I have some configuration for that. Just setting up the database, just run npm run db setup, and there's another readme here that kind of shows you how you would set this up and some example queries. Yeah, we're using type ORM as the ORM to connect and query our database, and yeah, otherwise it's just a couple of queries that don't do much. So I have a mutation, so we can actually create a new post, and all it is post. There's no other relationships or anything fancy. It's just a pretty basic application. And then we can query it, we can delete it, we can query by one post, or we can query all the posts. That's the extent of our application. Nothing too fancy, but it gives you like at least a base to start on to continue building for whatever your application needs. So then, yeah, we're just defining our resolvers and our type definitions. I'm not going to go super deep into this because this is more like TypeScript specific and GraphQL specific. So we can deploy the application. This is whenever it gets real risky deploying it live. But yeah, any questions about the actual app itself? Maybe about this library and how that works? This is like totally what is making all this magic happen. Whenever we define this new Apollo server, and which is coming from that Apollo server Lambda, and then we're enabling this GraphQL playground, which we'll see whenever this actually gets deployed. This will be how we'll test the API to make sure it works. And then we're going to create the actual handler, and I just set up some cores configuration as well. Okay. Oops. Alright, so now I'm back in the root of my application. So we talked about the different CDK stacks, so we can go ahead and deploy those. We have a couple of different options. Since we do have a CI/CD pipeline, we could go ahead and demo that. There is a bug with it right now, but we'll work through that and I'll explain how to get around it. But so whenever you're initially setting this up, you'll want to run CDK Bootstrap. I've already had this ran, and I already have all of these installed, so I'm not going to install this. But if you're starting from scratch, you have nothing set up on your machine, then this will give you the breakdown of how to set everything up. So I want to run CDK deploy my pipeline stack. And you can export your profile, so you don't have to put -- profile. I'm just used to doing that, so I'm going to continue doing that. But this should deploy our pipeline stack, and then we can deploy the rest of our applications from within the pipeline stack itself, and we can make some code changes to our app and see that happen through the pipeline itself. And the bug that exists, which could be my lack of understanding with the CDK, but whenever you're creating the code build project, code build has a service role. While this is running, I'll go ahead and explain this. And the service role is what is assumed to have code build deploy different resources. So if it's going to do like a CloudFormation create stack or update stack or anything like that, it needs to have access to those resources within code build. So in my mind, that would mean that we add this role here, which says it's a service role to be assumed during the run. However, this has not been the case, and even in my CDK out, which maybe this is a bug with the CDK, maybe it's a bug with my code, essentially the role that I have defined below, so that causes an issue with the initial run of our stack, which will fail because it doesn't have proper access. However, the role does get created, so what I've done to get around this so far is just go ahead and manually update the role, and then it happens for the first time deployment, and then after that it's fine. In production, I'd find a better way around that. Maybe just write that in CloudFormation, but for this, I think it's sufficient. So we just ran the CDK deploy pipeline stack, and this gives us all the outputs of what it's actually going to deploy. So you can look at this and get an idea of what's going on before you hit yes. We'll go ahead and hit yes, and then it should start deploying the pipeline stack. I have some old stuff in here I've never cleaned up, so just ignore all that. But our pipeline stack is being created, and this will take a few minutes. Yeah, now's a good time since we have a little bit of a pause. Any other questions you guys may have, whether it's about any of this or anything else AWS related or more CDK stuff, fire away.
Austin, this is Adam again. Is there any way we can version these lambdas using CDK?
Yes, I am not aware of the exact what the syntax for that is, but you can. Let's see, CDK Lambda version. Yeah, that, like I said, this is my first CDK project, so I'm pretty green on it as well. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. I don't know the syntax for it. It looks like it would be another construct you'd create.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a lot more information on that one.
Cool. Yeah, looks like they are versioning it.
Yeah, I feel like that's, for something new like that, my best thing I could do is point you to the docs right now.
One little tip for you too. When it comes to the docs, if you go back to them real quick.
Yep.
So if you go and you take a look at any one of these particular constructs and you look at the docs on them, there is a little bit of a blurb that kind of describes what the construct does. However, all the best part of the documentation is always in the overview of the module itself. So over there on the left side, if you go to the top, that overview, yep, on the Lambda itself, that part of the documentation is where you're really going to get a lot of the good examples and details about how to leverage all of this stuff. So if you go down a little bit, you can see where versions is. So here's some good examples of how you would use versions within your Lambda functions to get those things created and deployed.
Yeah, right on. This looks great. So this is even a better example with showing it as another construct, and then yeah. Right on. Yeah, good call out. Let's see what the status of this is. Does anybody else on the call have experience with the CDK, or what are you guys using? More CloudFormation and Terraform? I know somebody said they're using Pulumi. Anybody else want to volunteer what your company's using? I'm going to steal all your secrets.
It's interesting, Austin, like we're using same stack, like we're using JavaScript, Lambdas, GraphQL, but I mean, we're not using CDK, it's just straight CloudFormation.
Oh, gotcha. Are you using like SAM templates or raw CloudFormation? Okay, this is where it's gonna actually break out. What I was talking about earlier about, unless miraculously it actually adds my role, but I don't think that's gonna be the case. So here's our code pipeline. It automatically got kicked off after it was deployed. Pulls down whatever is latest from my last commit onto my master branch. Sends that code to code build. Code build runs the build steps, and here we go. So couldn't assume the role, didn't have the proper access, which is because my role wasn't added to the build. So what we need to do is within code build, so let me start from the beginning really quick. So from the management console, I could just type in code build. Shows me all my different build projects. Project name is pipeline stack. And then we can hit edit the environment. And then instead of this code build project role, which it automatically created, we have a different role called code build admin access, which just gives it full access. Oops. And now our code build project is up to date and has the correct access. So we can go back to our pipeline, hit release changes. This will release the last commit from master branch again, and we'll run our build again, and this time it should be successful. Fingers crossed.
Would you mind walking through that again, just a little bit slower?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start from the management console. Okay, so whenever you're like at your home, you can either find it in the all services, somewhere within here. There's so many, I never find it here. Within our developer tools, there it is, code build, or find it a little bit easier by searching for it. So we could go to code build, and then on the left it automatically routes you to build projects. So then I would just find that pipeline stack would be the name of it if you're following this demo. So then from pipeline stack, we're within our build project, we've got our different settings. We can see the state. So when it initially failed, it would just tell us that it was the first build that failed, how long it took. Then at the top, we have the notify, share, edit, delete, and start build with overrides. You want to edit the project because we're going to update the IAM role. So within that, you have all these different options. Where the IAM role is going to be at is within the environment. And then from there, you see the service role. And the service role before was code build access role, or whatever they called it. That's automatically generated from within the CDK. What we wanted to do instead is we created this role from within the pipeline stack.
Mm-hmm.
down here, and yeah, so it'd be code build admin access, and then I just changed it to that. And so you could just hit X, and then it'll give you the drop-down option
Perfect. Thank you.
to attach that. Yeah, and then if you needed to do anything extra fancy with updating your VPC or anything else, you could do all that from the settings tab as well. Okay, so now our pipeline should be working. Okay, so it looked at my pipeline stack, saw that there was no changes since it already deployed that. So the pipeline stack has been deployed again within itself, which is a weird thing. Maybe not the best to deploy the stack that's deploying itself, but we're doing it anyway. And then we're going to deploy our VPC stack, which I said earlier, the CDK is smart enough to know that since they're dependent on each other, whenever I run this npx CDK deploy, it's going to deploy the VPC stack before the other stacks, because the other stacks need to live inside the VPC. So that's kind of the gist of that. So we're going to run CDK deploy all, and then this require approval never is important whenever you're adding this into the pipeline, because if you didn't add this flag, it would fail because there's no users that could interact with code build and say yes or no to actually deploy the resources. So this way we never get prompted for that, we're automatically deploying it. Yeah, this may take a minute just to get all these resources up. Okay, VPC stack's done. I think the RDS one takes quite a few minutes to spin that up. I think I just have it, what do I have it set as? Like I said, I don't have it defined. I think by default it deploys a T3 medium. I'm not 100% sure, but you can define the actual instance size and everything within this construct itself. Anything that any potential configuration could be added to any of these constructs, but like Matt said earlier, a lot of it is done for you. That's kind of a lot of the positive sides of the CDK, is that if you don't need to configure it, you don't have to. Whereas with the CloudFormation, a lot of things you still need to actually configure, and could be a lot of extra stuff, like looking at the length of this file, 353 lines, the VPC stack, like almost 500 lines, and within the code itself it's like 50, so that's pretty nice. And then yeah, if you were looking at any of these configurations and you were like, oh wait, my role for my service role didn't get set up properly, you could go in here to this code build project and then try to debug this and fix this, because here is where the discrepancy between my service role that I created and the service role that it created happens, where my code build project is attaching this service role, even though I've defined my own service role up here. I don't know, that might be a bug, but you can see all of the different configurations before you actually deploy it. And you could do that with the CDK synth, which would output the CDK out file. So that way you can see everything before it's actually ran. And it's super nice that it automatically uploads all these assets for you with all your code. So then, yeah, you could see it synthesized this for our CDK out directory, which I didn't delete it, so it's just going to look the same. But this would show if we made any changes, what the changes were, and we could look at that within the stack or the template itself. And I guess this is another thing we can talk about with these FN values, AWS region, and then just adding these regions here. So instead of having to define my region within my code itself, I don't think I have an example anymore actually. There's another, I guess this would still be called a construct, off of the CDK core. So then if you wanted to add your AWS account ID or AWS region or any other values that could be attached to that AWS object. Yeah, so stack name, all these different things. And you can reference it just like this, and then it would use these FN lookup functions within CloudFormation to add these different values in, so that way you don't have to manage it and worry about hard coding your account IDs, especially if you're doing like cross-account applications and setting up CI/CD pipelines that go multi-account, then those come in handy, or like multi-region even. I feel like this almost turned into be like more of a CDK talk than a Lambda talk so far. I guess speaking of next meetup, or potentially the next meetup, we're gonna do a deeper dive on CI/CD pipelines with the CDK. I think Kevin's gonna try to set up either multi-region or multi-account, maybe both, I don't know. CI/CD pipeline that would be more production-like, where we would have a dev account, stage account, prod account, and then elevate throughout every account. I think we're gonna just probably use the same application, so the application code itself won't change. But yeah, that'll be a good one to attend if you're wanting to see more detailed stack. And I think instead of using project and pipeline explicitly, we might use the CDK pipeline construct instead, which has a concept of stages, and the stages I'm not super familiar with, but I think that helps with like setting up your multiple different environments with dev, stage, and prod, so that you can access it differently. But it does change the architecture of how you would want to lay this out, where these would no longer be independent stacks by themselves. They would live within the stage, because then your CI/CD pipeline, to maintain all these different environments, needs to be like the parent stack of all the other stacks, which is why I didn't build it that way, because I wanted to have them all independent. But so here we can see the different stacks being built. I guess we can go look at our VPC. Okay, yeah, it's pretty basic. Nothing, no logs or anything are enabled. All we did was set up our CIDR. Route tables were already built. That access control list was already created for us. The subnets were created for us. So we have two different subnets. Let's see. And then I only created one security group, not the greatest, but one security group that is, or actually I think I have two security groups, the ingress and the egress. And both of those are attached to my Lambda and RDS instance, so they're just sharing the same one. Access is throughout the VPC, so they're able to talk to each other over my 5432 port with Postgres. Postgres takes forever.
You'd mentioned earlier that you're streaming this on YouTube. Do you have recordings of earlier sessions that you've done?
Yep. Yeah, so here, let me pull it up. For the since COVID, so I guess like the last year and almost 2 years now, everything that we've done, we've started to record and put on YouTube. The quality has improved over time, but yeah, that's where all of the talks end up going. We actually just introduced doing Zoom calls. Initially, it was all done over YouTube. Yeah, I think Matt had a talk on here for the CDK. Yeah, you could come on here and check these out.
Yeah, I'm about to subscribe for sure.
Yeah, here's this one. I'll go ahead and post this in the chat. Oh, wrong one, wrong mat. Where is it at?
It's probably that one on the lower left, I'm betting.
There it is, yep. Okay. I'll put that on YouTube chat and then the Zoom chat. Okay, now we're at the very end of it. Almost done deploying the GraphQL Lambda. So is anybody thinking about using Lambda for their application with GraphQL, or is this just kind of like a more of a fun, interesting topic that you wanted to expand on, or is this something that you guys are thinking about actually using in production? I know one person said that they do use it in production. I don't know if there's like more motivation behind it.
Yeah, for me personally, it's an interesting topic that I wanted to check out. So no utilization right now.
Just kind of seeing how it works together, if it makes sense to actually use. Yeah.
Yeah, and also dipping my toes into the meetup group.
Right on. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Also, Austin, in the app section, are you using any ORM like?
Yeah. I'm using TypeORM. Where is it? Right here. So that's what how I define my, I guess I had never even opened this file. So I just have like a super basic entity. Yeah.
But what's your experience on the TypeORM? Like, is it pretty stabilized NPM package? Or?
I don't have a lot to compare it to, but my experience with it's been pretty nice. I don't know. I can't like give you a pros and cons list between this or like, I don't know, SQLize or anything like that, because I've mostly been doing NoSQL work in my career, but my job does use TypeORM. I've worked with other clients who use TypeORM, like vague, like a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it's like pretty nice. I don't know, all the like different decorators you can add to build your values, and they have a lot of different strict typing that could go along with this that's built into TypeORM itself. I don't know, it works really well with GraphQL. That, yeah, you could probably get at Google and find a better answer than that, but
Yeah, sure.
far,
I
I like it.
I mean, any information now, it's great. Like, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, no, for sure. So there's a question by Wayne. So you could use AppSync. It would be a lot different of an application, because with this we're building a traditional like Apollo server application within our Lambda. So the Lambda is more, we're no longer focused around our architecture being a Lambda, in my mind at least. More, this is focused on like an easy way to deploy something where we don't have to manage it. Yeah, we're using a Lambda, this and that. But in reality, like with this Apollo server Lambda NPM package, we're able to ignore that we're building on a Lambda and just focus on building a normal Apollo GraphQL API. Whereas if you were using AppSync, AppSync is a lot different, where this is going to change our entire layout and be very specific to AppSync and more AWS focused, where we're like now AWS devs instead of like traditional engineers working on an Apollo GraphQL API. Yeah, AppSync is getting like pretty popular though, and they have updated their stuff quite a bit. But from my experience, with at least using it with Amplify, you're writing your code in a very different way. I could be wrong, but that's my experience with it. Okay. So everything's deployed. We have our pipeline stack, RDS stack, API stack, all created within the pipeline stack. We have our endpoints. We'll go to /GraphQL. Hopefully this works. Sweet. Okay, so now we have our, before I actually go into it, let me explain what I just did. So Within code build, we deployed all of our different stacks, which I talked about from the actual code itself. So those are end up being CloudFormation stacks, so that you can manage all of those within here. You could delete it, you can update it, do whatever you need to do. The API stack is where the actual meat and potatoes of this application is. So we have the API gateway and the Lambda function. And API gateway is going to be where our actual endpoint is created and manage all the traffic. So we have this GraphQL endpoint, which was created whenever we, inside of the CDK, inside our API stack, we added this resource. So we have this API that's defined, which is a Lambda REST API. Ignore the REST part because it doesn't really apply to us, but that's what it's called. So then we're going to add another resource on its root, which the root would just be our slash route, our root route. So we're going to add the GraphQL route to that. So now we'll have slash GraphQL and give it a method of any. That's how this was created and defined. So now you could come in here and test it and this and that. It's probably going to break because I don't know if you can write GraphQL through this, but what we could do is go to stages and go to prod, go to our dropdown, we see our root, and we see GraphQL, and we have a get method, all these other methods because we defined it to have any, and we can just go to that route, and that'll give us our endpoint, which was the same thing that came out of here, was the GraphQL endpoint is part of the outputs, and how that output was created is from here at the bottom. We defined that we wanted the API path output. So it outputted that for us. Now we can just go ahead and play around with this. So I'm going to grab one of the mutations from here in the README. Okay, so we can add a post. Okay, so the first one's gonna, oh, never mind. Oh, that's great. So it worked automatically. So now we created a post, and we could go ahead and just write some GraphQL to query our post. Oops. ID, title, and text. And we return the post, it looks the same. I should do a different query or add another post. Okay, now we can return ID2. And we could query all of our posts. Nothing crazy, but cool. So now we return all of them. That's essentially the application, and if we wanted to add anything new to this, like let's say we wanted to test out our CI/CD pipeline works for the Lambda, which I think this would be actually my first time testing that my Lambda deploys properly whenever I do the pipeline. So we'll just go ahead and add this hello world. So all this would do is we'll query hello, and it'll just return back the string. And then in our type defs, we'll add our hello string. And I think that's all we need to do. We could go ahead and go into app, test it locally, make sure it works. And our hello query pops up. Oops. Let's do a new query. Hello. And it returns hello world. So all we need to do to deploy that is push it up to GitHub. And I don't think I want to make any changes here. So all we did was add our type def for that and our query. So Great. Just see the pipeline work go away. Okay, I'm gonna go back to, on the left-hand side, I'm in my code build directory, but just showing where how I'm navigating to this. You can see like all the different developer tools within this navigation panel. So then I could go back to my pipelines from here, or if I was back at the root, I could type in code pipeline and find that. And then my pipeline is called the pipeline stack. And then we could see it just pulled this down just a second ago, and my commit was added hello world query. So we'll see this start to build out again. And one thing to note, like I added all of those, so I added that in my build step, npx cdk deploy all. So you would think like, why would you want to do that? You just made it so that whenever you make a change to the application code itself, it'll deploy everything again. That's true if there's changes to other things, because what ends up happening with CloudFormation is it runs a what's it called? It basically will look at all of my different stacks and see if there's any changes to them. And if there's no changes, then it'll create this change set. But if there's no changes, there's nothing to deploy. So it will only deploy changes for something that was updated, which looks like I might have messed that up. Or didn't my... Oh no, here it is. It is running. Okay. So then now we could see it's creating this change set and saying like, okay, we just made changes to the actual code itself, and so we're gonna update that API and not update the other stacks, which is nice. And then if you did make a change to your VPC stack, then it would deploy this, but maybe you didn't make a change to this, it would be like there was no changes. So that way you can keep it coupled into the same pipeline. If it got larger scale and you had multiple teams working on it and you were worried about conflicts, maybe not do that, but oh yeah. I've heard people complain about security too with AppSync. My thing is more of like how we're writing the application code was the biggest reason, because you want to like make it like, cause you can go into AppSync. For anybody that thought I was just being ADHD, I was looking at the chat. Wayne put another comment in there, but you can like build your AppSync API would just look a lot different. Like if you're writing everything with Lambda functions, we just did raw Lambdas that queried a RDS instance, and I just had like a shit ton of Lambda files, it would look way different than this application. So I don't know, whenever I'm working with the team, I usually don't want to like throw an entirely new technology onto everybody and be like, we don't know how to work with this, and then then it's like not a great idea. Okay. You see the change with the hello world. And there we go. So that's our deployed application with the CI/CD pipeline with Lambda and GraphQL. Any questions or anything? Otherwise, that's a wrap for this. We can go ahead and go to like a Q&A. I don't know where my slides are at. And yeah, like I said, next talk will be Kevin going deeper into CI/CD pipelines and stuff like that for multi-account, maybe a little bit more complex architectures that require maybe a bigger team and how you would navigate the bigger team and setting up maybe a branching strategy. I'm not sure what all he has planned yet, but I think it would be a lot more in depth than this pipeline.
So I have one question about those dependencies, right? So it right now, if you made a change, let's say to that VPC layer, right, because all of the other stacks are dependent on them, would it know to deploy the rest of them? Does it have to deploy the rest of them?
Sorry, can you ask that question one more time?
Yeah, so back in your code, you have different stacks that are dependent on one another.
Yeah.
At least I think that was the case, right?
Yep.
If you were to make a change to that top layer, right, that parent, would CDK understand that it would then have to redeploy the rest of them?
So how this is set up is, yes, like my VPC stack is my entire data center that my RDS instance and my Lambda live in. However, they're technically, even though it's what's inside of that, if I make a change just to my VPC, and let's say I added an extra security group, it would only make the update to this stack itself, not to everything else, because there would be nothing else for it to update for the RDS instance, unless I gave it the security group. But if I just like wanted to have a net new stack that did something with DynamoDB, and I needed to add some security group for whatever reason, I don't know, then it would just update my VPC stack. Because whenever you do a deployment with CloudFormation, it creates a change set, is what it's called. You can see it over here. And these change sets are like logs of what is new versus what is actually existing within AWS. And if you don't make a change to anything within the stack, then it's going to be like there's nothing to update, which is exactly what we saw right here with these, because all I did was update the code within my API stack, but I didn't update anything within these other stacks. So even though they're technically children of this stack, it wouldn't update them unless I also updated them. Or I made larger configuration changes with my VPC and I like changed my CIDR, changed my subnets and all of that, then yeah, it would change things then. But
perfect.
Yeah, that would just probably break my application really, but any other questions? Well, if that's it, then I'm going to go ahead and close it out. A little bit shorter than normal. I think an hour is a good amount of time, though. It gets kind of dry if you're going on for 2 hours on a Zoom call on a Wednesday night. But yeah, thanks for everybody who came. And yeah, if you guys are new and you want to come back, like definitely encourage that. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or join the meetup group. We've been a little bit infrequent with the talks the last few months just because it's been a lot of work, and so trying to take a break and not get super consumed. Been doing the meetup for several years now, but I think we're gonna get back on like a regular cadence here soon to do it, hopefully monthly again.
Cool.
Yeah, you're in Boulder. We used to do, before COVID, all of these used to be in person in Denver and sometimes in Boulder. Maybe we could make something happen soon, because I feel like COVID's hopefully going out of the door, but who knows? Depends on what venues say and if how much people they want. But I'm not aware of an AWS talk in person in Boulder. All right, well, hope you guys
Thanks, Austin.
enjoy your
This is
Wednesday.
great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Appreciate it.
All right, see you guys. Gonna end the stream. Have a good night.